The desperate plea. In a distant corner of the galaxy, the Mirians, a peaceful and highly advanced alien species, were in grave danger. Their beautiful homeworld, Zilurus, known for its towering crystal cities and flowing energy rivers, was under attack. A ruthless enemy, the Zarkans, was determined to destroy everything in its path. The Zarkans were a terrifying race, known for their brutal conquests across the stars. Their warships were massive, their weapons unmatched. They didn't negotiate or show mercy. The Mirians had always been a peaceful race, avoiding conflict and preferring to focus on science, art, and diplomacy. But now, with the Zarkan fleet approaching fast, their peaceful ways were no match for the oncoming storm. The Mirian High Council, the leaders of Zilurus, were in a state of panic. The Zarkans had already destroyed 2 of their outer colonies, and now Zilurus itself was in danger. The Mirians knew they couldn't win this fight on their own. They had no choice but to ask for help. From the safety of their underground command center, the council members gathered in a large circular chamber. The tension in the air was thick, and fear was written on every face. High Chancellor Verex, an elderly Mirian with silver skin and glowing blue eyes, stood at the center of the room. His voice was calm but filled with desperation. "We must send a plea to the Galactic Council. We cannot survive this alone," Verex said, looking around at the other council members. The Galactic Council was an organization of many alien species across the galaxy, created to maintain peace and cooperation. However, the Mirians knew that their request for help might not be answered. The Zarkans were feared by all, and many races preferred to stay out of their way rather than face their wrath. Despite this, the Mirians had no other options. The message was sent across the stars, a desperate call for help, begging any species capable of fighting to come to their aid. Days passed. Each day, the Zarkan fleet drew closer. The Mirians received no response from the Galactic Council. The council members grew anxious as hope began to fade. Verex spent hours watching the skies, waiting for any sign of help. But all he saw was the dark void of space and the distant flashes of Zarkan warships conquering their neighboring systems. One night, as the Mirians prepared for what seemed like the inevitable end, a response finally came. The Mirian communication officers were shocked when the message arrived. An answer from the human race, a species that was relatively new to the galactic stage. The Mirians didn't know much about humans. They were from a small blue planet called Earth, located in a far-off star system. Though humans had achieved space travel and joined the Galactic Council, they were often seen as unpredictable, even reckless. Most of the galaxy didn't take humans very seriously. Despite the doubts, the Mirians were desperate enough to accept any help, even from humans. The message from the humans was brief but clear. "We will send our fleet to aid you." Relief spread across the Mirian Council. For the first time in days, there was hope. Verex and the other leaders began to make preparations to welcome their saviors. They imagined powerful warships, advanced technology, and highly trained human soldiers that would help them fight off the Zarkans. But when the humans sent another message explaining that they were sending their weakest fleet, the relief quickly turned to confusion and fear. The Mirians couldn't believe what they were reading. Why would the humans send their weakest fleet when the situation was so dire? Weakest? One council member questioned. Is this a mistake? Do they not understand the threat we face? Verex frowned, deep in thought. Perhaps humans have a different way of measuring strength. Maybe what they consider weak is still powerful. The council debated the matter for hours, trying to make sense of the human message. Some believed that the humans were mocking them or didn't take the Zarkan threat seriously. Others thought there might be more to the message than met the eye. In the end, with no other options, the Mirians had no choice but to accept the humans' offer. They sent a confirmation back to Earth, hoping that somehow, even the weakest human fleet would be enough to protect them. Days passed, and the Zarkan fleet continued its relentless march toward Zilurus. The Mirians anxiously awaited the arrival of their unexpected allies. Every hour, the tension grew as the shadow of war loomed closer. Finally, the day came. The Mirians watched the skies with bated breath. In the distance, small dots of light appeared, growing larger as they neared Zilurus. The human fleet had arrived. But as the Mirian leaders saw the ships for the first time, their hearts sank. The human fleet was small, almost laughably so. The ships looked worn and unimpressive compared to the sleek, mighty warships of the Zarkans. This was humanity's weakest fleet, and it looked like a joke. The Mirians exchanged worried glances. Is this really the help we waited for? One leader asked in disbelief. Verex, however, held onto a sliver of hope. Let's not judge too quickly, he said quietly. Perhaps there is more to these humans than we can see. And so, with doubt and hope tangled together, the Mirians prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of their world. This chapter sets up the tension and desperation the Mirians feel, while introducing humanity as an unlikely savior, keeping the story engaging and easy to follow. Humanity's strange response. The Mirians had pinned their last hopes on humanity. With the Zarkan fleet drawing nearer every hour, their only chance of survival depended on these distant, unfamiliar allies. Yet the message they had received from Earth left them baffled, and to some, deeply worried. The humans had agreed to help, but instead of sending their strongest and most capable warships, they had chosen to send what they called their weakest fleet. The phrase hung in the air like an unsolved riddle. The Mirian High Council gathered once again, their faces etched with concern and disbelief. Weakest fleet, Councillor Yilin repeated, shaking his head in confusion. He was one of the most experienced leaders, a strategist who had helped the Mirians avoid many conflicts over the centuries. Surely this is some kind of misunderstanding. We asked for help against the Zarkans, not a demonstration of incompetence. The rest of the council murmured in agreement. They had expected Earth to send its finest, perhaps a fleet armed with powerful weapons and advanced technology, capable of standing against the terrifying Zarkan warships. Instead, they were being offered what sounded like a token effort at best, or a cruel joke at worst. High Chancellor Verex, who had tried to maintain calm throughout the crisis, was visibly troubled as well. He looked around the circular chamber, noticing the anxious expressions of his fellow leaders. The fear in the room was thick, almost suffocating. "I don't understand why they would send their weakest fleet," said Councillor Inel, a younger member of the High Council, known for her sharp intellect and logical thinking. "Unless they believe even their weakest fleet is more powerful than anything we could imagine. But even that seems unlikely given what we've heard about their capabilities." The Mirians knew very little about humans beyond the basics. Earth was far from Zilurus, located in an isolated part of the galaxy. The humans had only recently joined the Galactic Council, and though they had made some contributions, their military strength was largely unproven. They were known more for their unpredictable nature than for their might. "Perhaps they have different tactics than we do," Verex suggested, trying to inject some optimism into the conversation. "Perhaps their weakest fleet is strong in ways we don't understand." Despite his words, doubt crept into his heart as well. The Mirians were a race of peace, but they were also a race of intelligence and reason. And reason told them that sending a weak fleet into battle against the Zarkans was nothing short of madness. Still, they had no other choice. They were alone in the galaxy. The Galactic Council had remained silent. No other species dared to face the Zarkans, and the Mirians did not have the strength to defend themselves. If they rejected the humans' help, they would face certain annihilation. So with heavy hearts and anxious minds, they accepted humanity's offer. As the days passed, tension continued to build across Zilurus. The skies were watched day and night by Mirian soldiers, scientists, and civilians alike, all waiting for the arrival of the human fleet. Every report that came in only deepened the sense of dread. The Zarkan forces had nearly reached the edge of the Zilurus system, and no one had any idea when the humans would arrive, if they arrived at all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, the signal came. Humanity's fleet was nearing Zilurus. In the central command room, a group of Mirian leaders gathered around a large holographic display that showed the incoming fleet. There were 6 ships in total, each smaller than the Zarkan warships that loomed on the horizon of their star system. The human ships appeared old, weathered, and, to the Mirians, unimpressive. Verex stood at the head of the room, watching silently as the fleet approached. His face was unreadable, but inside, he felt a deep unease. The Mirians had been hoping for something grand, something that would fill them with hope. But this fleet looked weak, just as the humans had warned. The ships were far smaller than expected, and their appearance offered little comfort to the fearful leaders of Zilurus. "It's true," Yellen muttered under his breath. "This really is their weakest fleet." Enel, standing beside him, frowned. "I don't understand. Why would they send such small, outdated ships to face the Zarkans?" No one had an answer. All they could do was wait and hope that there was more to this human fleet than met the eye. When the human ships finally entered Zilurus orbit, a message came through from the fleet's commander. It was a simple, brief communication, nothing like the long-winded speeches the Mirians were used to in their diplomatic exchanges. "This is Captain Reynolds of the Earth Fleet. We've arrived as promised. Prepare for engagement." There was no boastfulness, no bravado. The message was direct and calm, but it gave the Mirians no clue as to what the humans had planned. Despite their doubts, they couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe the humans knew something they didn't. Maybe there was a hidden strength in these ships that would turn the tide of the battle. The Zarkan fleet was closing in fast, and there was no more time to second-guess their allies. The fate of Zilurus now rested in the hands of humanity's weakest fleet. With nothing left to do but trust in their new allies, the Mirians readied themselves for the fight of their lives. This part continues building the tension and mystery around the human fleet while deepening the Mirians' uncertainty. The audience remains hooked by the promise of what's to come, keeping them engaged for the upcoming battle. The battle begins. The Zarkan fleet loomed on the edge of the Zilurus system like a shadow of impending doom. Their massive warships blotted out the stars, sleek and deadly, brimming with destructive firepower. The Mirians watched with growing dread as their scanners picked up the Zarkan ships, moving steadily toward their homeworld. The time for preparation had ended. The time for battle had come. Inside the command center on Zilurus, High Chancellor Verex stood before a large screen displaying the enemy fleet. His expression was grim, but his voice remained steady as he addressed the assembled Mirian leaders and officers. "The Zarkans are upon us," he said. "The fate of our world depends on this moment. Let us hope our new allies are as capable as they claim." Beside him, Counselor Yellen couldn't hide his unease. "Our scanners show that the human fleet is vastly outmatched," he murmured. "We are putting our faith in a force that appears woefully inadequate." Verex nodded but said nothing in response. He had his own doubts, but now was not the time for second-guessing. They had chosen to trust humanity's promise, and there was no turning back. Their only hope was to stand united with their human allies. Out in space, the human fleet took its position near Zilurus. 6 small, seemingly outdated ships faced the oncoming Zarkan armée. These ships bore the marks of battle, their hulls scuffed and worn, but they remained steady and ready for the fight. On board the lead ship, the Resolute, Captain Reynolds surveyed the situation. His crew worked efficiently around him, their faces calm and focused despite the odds they faced. They had fought in battles before, and though this one seemed particularly daunting, there was no fear in their eyes, only determination. "Commander," one of his officers said, "the Zarkan fleet is closing in. They'll be within firing range soon." Reynolds nodded. "Good, let them come." The officer looked puzzled for a moment, but returned to his station without question. Reynolds had a reputation for staying calm in even the most dire situations, and his crew trusted him implicitly. They knew he always had a plan, even when things seemed bleak. Outside the ship, the Zarkan fleet drew nearer. Their warships were enormous, bristling with weapons and energy shields that made them nearly invulnerable. The Mirians, watching from their command center, couldn't help but feel a surge of despair as they compared the Zarkan vessels to the much smaller human ships. How can they hope to stand against such overwhelming force? Counselor Inel whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "We'll find out soon enough," Verex replied quietly. The battle began with a sudden, deafening roar as the Zarkan warships unleashed their first barrage. Bright streaks of energy shot across the void of space, aimed directly at the human fleet. The Mirians watched in horror, certain that their allies would be obliterated in an instant. But something unexpected happened. Just as the Zarkan energy beams reached the human ships, the smaller vessels began to move with astonishing speed and precision. They darted and weaved through space, evading the incoming fire with an almost impossible grace. The Zarkan shots missed their targets entirely, flying harmlessly past the human fleet. The Mirians gasped in disbelief. How could such large, cumbersome-looking ships move so quickly? On board the Resolute, Captain Reynolds remained calm as his crew executed the maneuvers he had carefully planned. "Engage countermeasures," he ordered. "Let's show them what we can do." The human ships, though small and seemingly weak, had one significant advantage. They were designed for agility and adaptability. The Zarkan warships, while powerful, were slow and heavy. They were built for brute strength, not speed, and they struggled to keep up with the fast-moving human fleet. As the Zarkans continued to fire, the human ships darted between the blasts, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. Their weapons weren't as powerful as the Zarkans, but they were precise, targeting weak points in the enemy ship's defenses. One by one, the Zarkan warships began to take damage. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but the Mirians could hardly believe what they were seeing. The human fleet, despite being smaller and supposedly weaker, was holding its own against the mighty Zarkan armada. They're doing it," Inel said in amazement. "The humans are actually fighting them off." Verex watched in awe as the human ships continued their rapid maneuvers, dodging Zarkan fire and landing hits of their own. The humans had promised their weakest fleet, but now it seemed like their strength was hidden in their tactics rather than raw power. "We may have underestimated our allies," Verex admitted, his voice filled with hope for the first time in days. As the battle raged on, the Zarkans grew frustrated. Their massive warships were used to overwhelming their enemies quickly, crushing any resistance with sheer firepower. But the humans refused to fall, slipping through their attacks like ghosts in the darkness. On board the Zarkan flagship, the commander snarled in anger as his forces failed to land a decisive blow against the human fleet. "What are these insects?" he growled. "How do they evade our fire so easily?" The Zarkan officers scrambled to adjust their strategies, but it was too late. The human fleet had already thrown them off balance. As the battle raged on, the Zarkans grew frustrated. Their massive warships were used to overwhelming their enemies quickly, crushing any resistance with sheer firepower. But the humans refused to fall, slipping through their attacks like ghosts in the darkness. On board the Zarkan flagship, the commander snarled in anger as his forces failed to land a decisive blow against the human fleet. "What are these insects?" he growled. "How do they evade our fire so easily?" The Zarkan officers scrambled to adjust their strategies, but it was too late. The human fleet had already thrown them off balance. Back on Zillaris, the Mirians dared to feel hope for the first time. The human fleet was proving far more capable than they had ever expected. The Zarkans were not invincible after all. But the battle was far from over, and both sides knew it. The Zarkans still outnumbered and outgunned the humans, and the final outcome remained uncertain. As the battle continued, the Mirians watched with bated breath, knowing that the fate of their world hung in the balance. The humans had shown them that strength didn't always come in the form of the biggest or most powerful ships. Sometimes, strength came from strategy, courage, and the ability to adapt to the most impossible of circumstances. The battle for Zillaris was only just beginning. The turning tide. As the battle for Zillaris raged on, it became clear that the humans were no ordinary force. The Zarkan fleet, once so certain of their overwhelming victory, now found themselves struggling to land any decisive blow. Each time they attempted to overpower the smaller human ships, the agile vessels slipped through their attacks, striking back with pinpoint precision. In the Zillaris Command Center, the mood had shifted from despair to cautious optimism. High Chancellor Varric stood at the central console, eyes fixed on the screen displaying the chaotic battle in space. Every movement of the human fleet defied expectation, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. "They're turning the tide," Counselor Inel whispered in awe, her gaze fixed on the display. "I never imagined such a small fleet could hold back the Zarkans." Varric nodded, though his expression remained serious. "They're not just holding them back, they're adapting. Every time the Zarkans adjust their strategy, the humans counter it. It's as if they're anticipating their moves." In the vastness of space, the Zarkan flagship loomed ominously over the battlefield, its massive cannons glowing with the energy of 1,000 suns. On board, Commander Threx seethed with frustration. His forces had never faced such a foe, one that refused to crumble beneath their superior firepower. His voice, cold and sharp, echoed through the command deck. "Why have we not crushed these insignificant humans?" Threx growled, his eyes glowing with fury. "They are but a handful of ships." A Zarkan officer trembled as he responded. "Commander, their tactics are unconventional. They evade our attacks and strike at our weak points. It's as if they know our every move before we make it." Threx's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. He had never faced an enemy so elusive, so frustratingly difficult to defeat. But he was not about to let a handful of humans stand in the way of his victory. "Prepare the flagship's main cannon," Threx ordered, his voice icy. "We'll wipe them out in one blow." On board the human lead ship, the resolute Captain Reynolds stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the tactical display. His crew moved with the calm efficiency born of years of training, but the tension was palpable. They had managed to outmaneuver the Zarkan fleet so far, but the battle was far from over. "Sir," Lieutenant Harper called out from the weapons console, "the Zarkan flagship is powering up its main cannon. It looks like they're preparing for a massive attack." Reynolds' brow furrowed. "How long until it's fully charged?" "Approximately 2 minutes," Harper replied, her voice tense. "If they fire that cannon, we won't stand a chance." Reynolds considered their options. The human fleet had held its own so far, but a direct hit from the Zarkan flagship's main cannon would spell disaster. They needed to act quickly, or the battle, and the Mirians' hope would be lost. "Get me Commander Hayes on the Defiant," Reynolds ordered. Moments later, the face of Commander Hayes appeared on the screen. He was a grizzled veteran, his expression as calm as ever despite the chaos around him. "Reynolds," Hayes greeted, "what's the plan?" "We've got about 2 minutes before that flagship fires its main cannon," Reynolds said, his voice steady. "We need to disable it before they have the chance." Hayes nodded. "Understood. What's the play?" Reynolds brought up a tactical display of the Zarkan flagship. "Their main cannon is heavily shielded, but we've identified a weak point in their defense grid. If we hit it hard enough, we can overload their shield generator and disable the cannon." Hayes grinned, a fierce gleam in his eyes. "I'll take care of it." The screen went dark as Hayes cut the connection, and Reynolds turned to his crew. "All ships, focus your fire on the Zarkan flagship's defense grid. We're not letting them fire that cannon." Out in the void, the human ships began to shift their positions, moving into formation. The Defiant, led by Commander Hayes, broke away from the main fleet and headed straight for the Zarkan flagship, its engines burning bright as it pushed forward at maximum speed. The Zarkans' last gambit. Despite their crushing losses, the Zarkans were not yet defeated. Deep within the heart of their flagship, Commander Threx paced furiously. His once formidable fleet was now in ruins, scattered across the battlefield. Yet his mind churned with one final plan, a desperate, last-ditch effort to turn the tide of battle. The Zarkans had never been known for retreat, and they would not allow themselves to be bested by a species they had deemed weak. Threx barked orders to his remaining officers. Prepare the gravitic bomb. If we can't claim victory, we will take these humans and Zillaris down with us. In the command center of the Resolute, Captain Reynolds and his crew had begun to feel a cautious sense of relief. The Zarkan fleet had been decimated, and Zillaris was no longer under immediate threat. However, something still felt off to Reynolds. His instincts, honed over years of command, told him that the Zarkans wouldn't simply surrender. Lieutenant Harper, are you picking up any unusual energy signatures from the Zarkan flagship? Reynolds asked, his eyes narrowing at the tactical display. Harper's fingers flew across the console as she analyzed the data. A few moments later, her face paled. Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy buildup within the Zarkan flagship. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Reynolds' stomach dropped. He knew exactly what the Zarkans were planning. They're going to deploy a gravitic bomb, he said, his voice grim. If that thing goes off, it could destroy everything within a massive radius, including us and Zillaris. The bridge crew stared at their captain, the weight of the situation sinking in. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. If the Zarkans succeeded in deploying the bomb, all their victories would be for nothing. We need to stop them, Reynolds said firmly. Now. Meanwhile, in the Zillaris command center, Chancellor Verex and Counselor Inel had also received word of the Zarkans' new threat. Panic spread through the control room as technicians scrambled to find a way to neutralize the bomb. The Zarkans had played their final card, and it was a terrifying one. Verex turned to the human ambassador, who had been monitoring the situation closely. Can your forces stop this weapon? He asked, desperation evident in his voice. The ambassador remained calm but resolute. Captain Reynolds will do everything he can. The human fleet isn't finished yet. Back on the Resolute, Reynolds had already begun formulating a plan. Time was running out, and they needed to act quickly. We'll send a strike team to infiltrate the Zarkan flagship and disable the bomb before they can deploy it, he said, glancing at his officers. This mission will be dangerous, but it's our only shot. Commander Hayes, still recovering from the earlier battle aboard the Defiant, volunteered without hesitation. I'll lead the team, he said, determination in his eyes. We've faced worse odds before. Reynolds nodded, trusting Hayes with the mission. Take the best you've got. Get in, disable the bomb, and get out. We'll cover you from here. Hayes quickly assembled a team of elite soldiers, all of whom were veterans of numerous battles. They boarded a small, fast-moving shuttle and set course for the Zarkan flagship, using the wreckage of the battlefield to conceal their approach. As they neared the enemy ship, the tension in the shuttle was palpable. Hayes knew that failure wasn't an option. The gravitic bomb was a weapon of unimaginable destruction, capable of ripping apart space itself. If they didn't succeed, millions of lives would be lost. Inside the Zarkan flagship, chaos reigned as the remaining crew prepared for the deployment of the bomb. Hayes and his team slipped past Zarkan patrols, using their advanced cloaking technology to remain undetected. As they approached the bomb chamber, they could hear the hum of the powerful device, growing louder with each step. Hayes gestured for his team to halt as they arrived at the entrance to the chamber. 2 Zarkan guards stood watch, their massive forms blocking the way. With a silent signal, the human soldiers moved into action. In a matter of seconds, the guards were neutralized, and the team pushed forward into the chamber. Here, at the center of the room, stood the gravitic bomb. It was a towering device, pulsating with energy, and its activation sequence had already begun. Hayes quickly signaled the team's tech expert, Sergeant Torres, to start disarming the bomb. Torres worked furiously, her fingers flying across the control panel as she tried to override the bomb's systems. The countdown was already well underway, and they had only minutes to spare. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she focused on disarming the device, her hands moving with practiced precision. Almost there, Torres muttered, her voice tense. Just a few more seconds. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the flagship. The Zarkans had detected the intruders, and reinforcements were on their way. Hayes and the rest of the team took defensive positions around the chamber, preparing for the inevitable fight. "Taurus, we're running out of time," Hayes shouted as the sound of Zarkan boots echoed down the corridor. "Just hold them off for a few more seconds," Taurus replied, her hands still working frantically. The first wave of Zarkan soldiers stormed into the chamber, and the humans opened fire. The fight was brutal and close quarters, with energy blasts and melee weapons clashing in the confined space. Hayes fought with everything he had, knowing that every second they delayed the Zarkans was a second closer to victory. Finally, Torrid shouted, "Got it." As the bomb's energy signature began to dissipate, she had successfully disabled the device, stopping the countdown just moments before detonation. "Move out," Hayes ordered, and the team quickly retreated from the chamber, fighting their way back to the shuttle. Back on the Resolute, Captain Reynolds watched as Hayes' shuttle emerged from the Zarkon flagship. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the bomb had been disarmed. "Mission accomplished," Hayes' voice crackled over the comms. "The bomb is disabled." Reynolds smiled. "Well done, Commander. Let's finish this." The human fleet, now emboldened by their success, launched a final assault on the remaining Zarkan ships. With their flagship crippled and their most dangerous weapon neutralized, the Zarkan forces began to retreat. As the last of the Zarkan ships flowed into hyperspace, the battlefield fell silent. Humanity had triumphed once again, not just through superior technology, but through courage, determination, and the will to protect their allies. Zalaris was safe, and the Zarkans had been driven back. But even as the humans celebrated their victory, they knew that the war was far from over. The Zarkans would return, and when they did, humanity would be ready. Here, at the center of the room, stood the gravitic bomb. It was a towering device, pulsating with energy, and its activation sequence had already begun. Hayes quickly signaled the team's tech expert, Sergeant Torres, to start disarming the bomb. Torres worked furiously, her fingers flying across the control panel as she tried to override the bomb's systems. The countdown was already well underway, and they had only minutes to spare. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she focused on disarming the device, her hands moving with practiced precision. "Almost there," Torres muttered, her voice tense. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the flagship. The Zarkans had detected the intruders, and reinforcements were on their way. Hayes and the rest of the team took defensive positions around the chamber, preparing for the inevitable fight. "Taurus, we're running out of time," Hayes shouted as the sound of Zarkan boots echoed down the corridor. "Just hold them off for a few more seconds," Torres replied, her hands still working frantically. The first wave of Zarkan soldiers stormed into the chamber, and the humans opened fire. The fight was brutal and close quarters, with energy blasts and melee weapons clashing in the confined space. Hayes fought with everything he had, knowing that every second they delayed the Zarkans was a second closer to victory. Finally, Torres shouted, "Got it." As the bomb's energy signature began to dissipate, she had successfully disabled the device, stopping the countdown just moments before detonation. "Move out," Hayes ordered, and the team quickly retreated from the chamber, fighting their way back to the shuttle. Back on the Resolute, Captain Reynolds watched as Hayes' shuttle emerged from the Zarkon flagship. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the bomb had been disarmed. "Mission accomplished," Hayes' voice crackled over the comms. "The bomb is disabled." Reynolds smiled. "Well done, Commander. Let's finish this." The human fleet, now emboldened by their success, launched a final assault on the remaining Zarkan ships. With their flagship crippled and their most dangerous weapon neutralized, the Zarkan forces began to retreat. As the last of the Zarkan ships flowed into hyperspace, the battlefield fell silent. Humanity had triumphed once again, not just through superior technology, but through courage, determination, and the will to protect their allies. Zalaris was safe, and the Zarkans had been driven back. But even as the humans celebrated their victory, they knew that the war was far from over. The Zarkans would return, and when they did, humanity would be ready.